In September of 2012, Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin was a sleepy little town located an hour north of Milwaukee, right on the Sheboygan River. It boasted beautiful sights, serene waterfalls, good schools, and a safe community for all of its residents. So naturally, the whole town was shocked and disgusted to learn that the first Sheboygan Falls homicide in 16 years turned out to be the killing of a 78-year-old great-grandmother with a hatchet and a hammer. Welcome to another episode of Killer Bites. I'm Brandy, and in this episode we'll be discussing the murder trial of a 13-year-old boy named Nathan Paape and his best friend, Tino Barbeau. I'd like to offer a warning before we continue. This episode contains depictions of intense violence committed by minors that might be upsetting to viewers. Barbara Olsen was a family woman and a creature of habit. She visited her daughter, Judy Offutt, every morning. So when Barbara didn't come to say good morning that Tuesday, September 18th, she was a little worried. But when the next morning came and went, she became very worried and began calling her mother. After several unanswered calls, Judy decided to drive over to check on her mother. At first glance, it just looked like Barbara had gone out for something because the garage door was open and the car was gone. Once Judy got closer, she saw that there was a blanket laid out on the garage floor. Thinking this was odd, she got out to check, and upon closer inspection, there was a lot of blood on the floor and feet sticking out from under the blanket. Judy yells her mother's name several times, but can't bring herself to look under the blanket, so she runs to a neighbor to call 911.
Please send an ambulance and the police. My mother is laying in the garage and there's a lot of blood and there's a blanket over her head. There's a lot of blood.
How did the blanket get over her?
I have no idea.
And how old is your mother?
She is 78.
And is she breathing?
I don't know. I can't look. The blanket is over her head and I can't look.
Okay, who's there with you?
Oh God, the neighbor.
Okay, can the neighbor check if she's breathing?
Oh,
You don't have to go and look. You don't have to go. If your neighbor can just go and check if she's breathing.
Okay, he would like you to check.
Are you sending somebody?
I'm working on it. I need to know if she's breathing.
When Sheboygan Falls police arrived on the scene, they could not believe what they found under that blanket. The crime scene investigators found that Barbara had been beaten to a bloody pulp in her living room. Then someone had placed a black plastic trash bag over what remained of her head and fastened it with a belt before dragging her body into the garage. After the autopsy, it was determined that Barbara had been struck 27 times with both blunt and sharp instruments. The attackers had stolen her car, her purse, and some belongings. According to anyone that knew Barbara, she was a kind and giving soul that volunteered as a driver for less mobile seniors. Neither Barbara's family nor the police could think of anyone that might have a reason to do anything like this to Barbara. When the police found the car of the 78-year-old at a bowling alley, they checked the surveillance footage of it and several surrounding businesses, and they saw the two boys, Barbeau and Paape, leaving the car and then eating pizza nearby. Nathan Paape was contacted for questioning in his home on the night of the 19th. And Nathan is very emotional and eventually admits to everything he and Tino did, though he can't bring himself to speak the worst part out loud in front of his mother. The following day, Tino is questioned as well. The most remarkable thing about his interrogation is the utter lack of outward emotion Tino expresses. He begins fidgeting involuntarily at the more stressful moments, but even after he begins confessing, he remains alarmingly calm. At first, he's rather aloof about the whole thing, confidently claiming that he hasn't seen his grandma Barb, as he calls her, in at least a month. He lies about her car and his whereabouts over the past 3 days. It's only after the interrogator drops some info inferring that they know definitively that Tino is lying does he start admitting the truth. And though some of the boys' specific details differ, the base narrative was the same. On Friday, September 14th, Tino Barbeau ran away from court-mandated social care. He fled to his friend Nathan's house, where he stayed through the weekend. It isn't totally clear whether Nathan's mother, Bobby Paape, was aware of Tino's presence in her house over the weekend. Paape revealed that he and Tino had recently been in trouble with the police for breaking into a mutual friend's family home, something they had done 4 times. crimes. This was presumably one of the reasons for Tino's mandatory social care. When Pop arrived home from school on Monday, Tino was still there. The two began discussing how they, or at least Barbeau, could get enough money to run away for good. Barbeau posed the idea that they could intimidate his grandma Barb, whom he had stolen from prior, into giving them her ATM pin, and then maybe kill her. Pop claims he thought the killing part was a joke. Joking or not, the two boys armed themselves with a hatchet and a hammer and grabbed some bags to cover their faces so as not to be recognized. As the boys approached, they saw the garage door was open and went inside. Once in the garage, the boys tried to put their bag masks on, quickly realizing that though they obscured their faces, the boys were not able to see out of the bags. Improvising, Nathan took off his hoodie and offered it to Tino as a disguise while he tried to hide. At that very moment, Barbara Olsen opened the door, recognizing Tino immediately and quickly noticing Nathan. Barbara, already aware that Tino had run away, asked if they were in the garage because they were cold and invited them in. Once inside, Barbara tells Tino that she's gonna call his mother since he'd been missing for 3 days. It's at this point that the boys' stories start to differ. Tino initially says in questioning that he attacked his grandmother because she was gonna call his mother. He quickly changes his story at this point, saying he looked to Nathan for a confirmation to attack his great-grandmother. Nathan's story was that Tino started hitting her suddenly and continued to do so while he stood in horror, and then Tino called him over to help when he got the blade of the hatchet stuck in Barbara's skull. Nathan said that Tino told him to hit her with the hammer and that he was afraid Tino would hit him if he didn't. Nathan only admits to hitting Barbara Olsen twice with the hammer and never with the hatchet. While Tino insinuates that it was Nathan who must have done most of the hitting, each one blaming the other for the one hit with the sharp end of the hatchet that finally ended those last grueling moments of her life. The stories align somewhat once both boys are sure Barbara is dead, and Tino has covered Barbara's face so that he doesn't have to see what they did. They went around the house, gathering anything that looked like it was worth something. Then Tino ordered Nathan to wipe down all the door handles and surfaces they touched. Next, the two teens attempted to dispose of the body. First, they put a garbage bag over her head and put Nathan's belt around her neck to hold it in place. When asked why, Tino explained that it was because he didn't like seeing it, and Nathan thought it was to stop any more blood from spilling out while they moved her body. The boys dragged Barbara from the living room into the garage and attempted to get her into the trunk. Unable to lift the dead weight all the way up to the trunk, the boys tried wrapping the body in a blanket to lift it. The two small 13-year-olds were still too weak, so they decided to try and drag her back into the house and into the basement. They got back to the stairs leading up into the house and couldn't get the body up the steps back inside. So they abandoned the effort and put all the stolen goods as well as the murder weapons into the car and drove it to a church parking lot and walked back to Nathan's house. Each teen claims it was the other that took the money out of the purse and threw it down a sewer near Nathan's. The next morning, Nathan decided to skip school and the two boys returned to the car and drove it to a bowling alley. Then they walked and got Theo's Pizza. Though it's unclear when, at some point the boys also purchased $145 worth of marijuana. Nathan and Tino then went to a store, purchased gloves and wipes, and proceeded to wipe the car for prints before leaving the keys on the front seat and the bag of Barbara's valuables in plain sight, in the hopes that someone might take the car and the blame for Barbara's murder at the same time. Unfortunately for these two, this plan did not work out. The car was found where it was left, with the murder weapons in the trunk. Nathan Pop was taken into custody the night of his confession, and Tino had already been placed in custody for running away from social care. Antonio Tino Barbeau was charged with first-degree intentional homicide, and Nathan was charged with being party to the crime of first-degree intentional homicide. Both boys were tried as adults. Initially, Tino's defense attorney pled not guilty for the reason of mental disease or defect. Apparently, when Tino Barbeau was 10 years old, he had received a concussion after being hit by a car while riding his bike. Tino's defense claimed that this was possibly a traumatic brain injury and explained Tino's actions. The prosecutor did not feel like this was in any way an excuse, and the judge felt that the crime was so heinous that it could not be dismissed by concussion, so the defense had to pivot. Tino's defense then entered a plea bargain with the prosecution. Tino pled no contest to first-degree intentional homicide and was sentenced on August 12, 2013 to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 36 years. When it came time for Paape's trial, Tino Barbeau was subpoenaed to testify. In his plea agreement, it specifically stated that he did not have to, but he did anyway. Tino Barbeau testified against his former best friend, an accomplice in open court. Tino made sure to paint Nathan in a much guiltier light, as Nathan's defense had been trying to take the blame off Nathan by pushing it on Tino. Nathan's defense was basically that he was a desperate loser of sorts that would do absolutely anything for the praise of his peers. Nathan was depicted as Tino's faithful lackey. He was only going along with the plan that Tino was entirely responsible for, and did so out of either admiration or eventually fear. Nathan was also sentenced to life in prison, though the judge did grant slight leniency, noting that he felt that Nathan was somewhat less culpable for the murder. Nathan was given the possibility of parole in 31 years when he will be 45 years old. Before this heinous act, the town of Sheboygan Falls hadn't had a murder since 1996, so to say this community was rocked by this tragedy would be an understatement. But what I really can't stop thinking about is how this must have affected the families. To lose the life of a loved one is bad enough, but to lose them at the hands of another is unfathomable. I can't imagine what Tino's mother is going through, but it's even harder to imagine what Judy went through after finding her mother like that and then realizing it was her grandson that did it. Another thing that sticks with me on this one is, should the boys have been charged as adults? 13 is a long way off from 18, right? I in no way condone their horrendous actions, but I also can't understand what good it does for a child to be locked up with truly hardened criminals until they're middle-aged. What do you guys think? Should they have been tried as adults? Was Nathan just the scared bystander he claimed to be? Was Tino justified in testifying against his friend? Let us know in the comments section. That's it for Killer Bites. I'm Brandy, and thanks for watching.